Even if it's not a song you wrote, it's still fun to go in there and see what you can do, and how you can make it.
Yet tens of thousands filled stadiums because his voice and presence carried all the weight in the world. George Strait didn't just define country music. He embodied it, reshaping the landscape so that everyone who came after him had to measure themselves against his legacy. This career of authenticity and dominance is what makes the latest headlines so crushing. Because fans know the cowboy who defined their world is not immune to time. By the time George Strait entered the 2010s, he had already built a career that few in music history could rival. Stadiums filled at the mere mention of his name, his albums continued to sell, and his reputation as the king of country was firmly cemented. Yet in 2012, George made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the country music world. He would no longer be touring full-time. For decades, fans had grown used to the idea that George would always be there, releasing albums, performing shows, and riding across the stage in his cowboy hat like a symbol of permanence. But reality came knocking, and George made the decision to step away. The announcement of his ache that fans connected to his loss, even though George never openly confirmed the connection. The truth is, George Strait carried his pain in the most private way, refusing to exploit it for fame or sympathy. And that silence only made it more powerful. He chose to grieve as a father, not as a superstar. Over the years, fans would sometimes catch a glimpse of that sorrow, his eyes misting during certain songs, his voice breaking in the middle of a line. And those moments reminded them that behind the polished legend stood a man still haunted by tragedy. Jennifer's death also shaped his legacy in another way. George and Norma later established the Jennifer Lynn Strait Foundation, which quietly donates to children's charities across Texas. It was his way of turning heartbreak into hope, ensuring his daughter's name lived on through kindness. This chapter of George Strait's life reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows, and something personal, and something final. For decades, George has represented the strength of the cowboy spirit, the man who stayed true to his roots, while the rest of country music changed around him. But as time moves forward, reality cannot be avoided. The latest headlines remind fans that even legends are not untouchable. That even George Strait's story is moving toward its final chapter. It is the news no one wanted to hear, yet it is the reality that now makes country music fans cry. George Strait's rise in country music was nothing short of extraordinary. Born in Petite, Texas in 1952 and raised on a ranch, George wasn't groomed for stardom the way Nashville usually builds its stars. He was a soldier first, serving in the U.S. Army before he ever found his way to a microphone. Yet even then, the cowboy spirit ran deep in his blood. In the 1970s, he began performing with a band called Ace in the Hole, playing Hank's voice. The songs carried heavier weight. When he sang "The Cowboy Rides Away," it was no longer just a hit single from the 1980s, it was a farewell hymn, a closing chapter of an era. The tour stretched across 2 years, culminating in June 2014 at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, where over 104,000 fans gathered in what became the largest indoor concert in North American history. That night wasn't just a show, it was a coronation, a goodbye, and a reminder that country music was witnessing history. Guest stars like Miranda Lambert, Martina McBride, Alan Jackson, and Vince Gill joined him on stage. But no one could eclipse the man at the center. And when George sang his final notes, the arena stood still, knowing an age had ended. The cowboy who had defined their lives had chosen to walk away, not because he couldn't continue, but because he knew when it was time. tonks and small Texas venues, never imagining that one day he would become the man who redefined what country music meant for an entire generation. In 1981, George released his debut single, Unwound, and almost overnight, the industry realized something was different. While others chased trends, Strait stayed traditional. Steel guitars, fiddles, and a timeless baritone voice that carried sincerity like no one else. It was pure, it was real, and fans gravitated toward it like moths to a flame. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, George Strait became unstoppable. He racked up hit after hit, climbing the charts with songs like Amarillo by Morning, All My Exes Live in Texas, and Oceanfront Property. Each record wasn't just a commercial success, it was a cultural milestone. Country music fans saw him as the standard-bearer, a man who stayed true to tradition while others bent under pressure from record labels and shifting radio demands. He never needed wild stunts, flashy outfits, or overproduced music videos. George Strait stood there in a cowboy hat, crisp jeans and boots, and the music did the rest. And then came the record. For fans, the farewell was bittersweet. They respected his choice, but the silence that followed left a hole that could never be filled. This was not the end of George Strait the man, but it was the end of George Strait, the constant presence. And that alone was enough to make an entire generation of country music fans cry. Behind George Strait's calm smile and the steady presence that fans saw on stage was a man who had endured heartbreak most could never imagine. In 1986, when George was just 34 years old, and at the height of his rising career, tragedy struck his family in a way that would forever change his life. His 13-year-old daughter, Jennifer, was killed in a car accident. For George and his wife, Norma, it was an unbearable loss, the kind of pain that doesn't just cut deep, but lingers for a lifetime. In that moment, the man who seemed invincible, the cowboy who sang of heartache and love, was confronted with grief so overwhelming that he nearly walked away from music altogether. He rarely spoke publicly about Jennifer's death. Unlike other artists who might pour out their private lives in interviews, George chose silence, keeping his mourning within the family. But those who truly listened to his music could hear the weight of it in his voice. Songs like Baby Blue, released in 1988, 60 #1 singles, more than any other artist in any genre, a feat that stunned critics and left even longtime Nashville insiders in disbelief. He wasn't just popular, he was dominant. To see George Strait live was to experience a phenomenon. He didn't dance or shout on stage. Fittingly called The Cowboy Rides Away, was not just another tour, it was a cultural event. Every city he visited carried the weight of finality, fans knowing this might be the last time they would ever see him live. Tickets sold out instantly, people traveling across states and even across the country to catch a glimpse of the legend before he walked off into the sunset. Concert after concert became emotional gatherings, not simply shows, but goodbyes. Fans wept openly in arenas, holding signs that said, "Don't go George," or "Thank you, King George." And George, though always a stoic performer, has always been more than just a country singer. To millions, he is the king of country, the voice that carried their childhoods, heartbreaks, and celebrations. But now, news about George has surfaced that leaves fans shaken, tears welling in their eyes, and emotions running higher than ever. It isn't about another sold-out stadium, another record broken, or even a new album. This time, it's about something deeper.